right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders, and I hope you are all well. This is a question and answer based podcast. Typically, if you would like your question answered on a future episode, go over to fearcastpodcast.com. You can send me a message over there. You can send me a message over at Instagram. I am Fearcast Podcast over at the Instagrams. You can send me a message over there. You can send me a DM over there as well. I suppose that's the same. That's how you send me a message. If you send me a DM over there, and you can send me an audio question over. That's probably the easiest way to get an audio question to me. Audio questions get shot right to the tippity top of the list, and you can, send me the question over there. I'll read it, listen to it, consider it, likely put it up on a future episode. So today is going to be a little bit different. Today is going to be an interview. So today I had Natalia Aiza on. She is an expert in OCD and anxiety disorder treatment. And today she joined me to talk about one of her expertises. Anyways, her expertise on SPACE, which is supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions. So this is a model of treatment. I'm not going to try to waste your time trying to summarize it right here. Natalia is going to do a fantastic job explaining it, and I'm going to do an adequate job trying to keep up with her and ask reasonable questions and try to also sound like I know what I'm talking about. So let me tell you a little bit about Natalia first, and then we'll jump into things. Natalia Aiza is a seasoned therapist, parent trainer, writer, and entrepreneur. Her core missions are to facilitate awareness and healing for those with OCD and to amplify OCD competency among mental health practitioners. She is the co-founder of Kairos Wellness Collective, an innovative therapy center that specializes in OCD and anxiety disorders. In the last 3 years, Kairos has expanded to 4 locations in Colorado and has served over 2,000 families and individual clients. Natalia also advocates for OCD awareness and provides free psychoeducation on her popular Instagram account at letstalk.ocd. Natalia received her BA in literature at Harvard University and her MA in clinical mental health counseling from Palo Alto University. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Natalia Aiza. All right, Natalia Aiza, thank you so much for joining me for today's Fearcast. We're here to talk about SPACE, what that is, how it works, why would somebody want to do it for their kids and potentially other folks. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, I'm so excited to have you on. You reached out to me via the Instagrams and said that you wanted to be on, wanted to talk about SPACE, and I was very interested because we haven't had anybody on this podcast to talk about SPACE, and I want to say it's relatively new. It's a relatively new approach. I think I only first heard about it, I want to say 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I think in the world of treatment, especially mental health treatment, that's still relatively new. But that being said, it's probably been around a lot longer, a lot researched than that, but it's certainly gaining momentum. And it can be really, really effective. So I'm so glad to have you on to talk about this and what folks can, or how this approach differs from traditional treatments and can help people who are perhaps feeling stuck.
Absolutely. So first, to clarify, SPACE is a parenting approach for children with anxiety and OCD. So it is actually a treatment that is centered around the parents. And as we know, because OCD is a pretty genetic disorder, sometimes it's us parents with OCD responding to our child's OCD, which is what my personal situation was when I learned SPACE. So SPACE stands for Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. And I have to give a big shout out to my professional hero, Dr. Eli Leibowitz at the Yale Child Study Center. He really worked incredibly hard to create a science-based approach to parental therapy. I think most of what we have for parent training up until Dr. Leibowitz is styles. It's like different approaches, methodologies that a lot of times are just opinions. Whereas Dr. Leibowitz, he's a scientist. He got the data. And he has checked and rechecked it. And space has great results. It has incredible outcomes, great efficacy. And even in situations where the child is not going to come in for therapy, refuses, or the parents, can't accommodate that, even virtually given space treatment has tremendous outcomes for childhood anxiety and OCD.
That's amazing. And as a side note, after they go through the treatment, they do qualify for NASA. Is that correct? My understanding it is not correct.
Different space. No.
Different space. Okay. I'm going to cross that note off. Okay. Then I have to abandon probably 20 minutes of conversation. But other than that, I guess tell me how space was developed, or let's talk about how space was developed and why it was developed.
So, as those of us who are OCD therapists, and I'm a pediatric OCD therapist, I run a pretty large center here in Boulder, Colorado, with offshoots in Fort Collins and Denver. We have hundreds of pediatric cases at any one time, and many parents are, of the mindset of like, here's my child, they have mental health issues, like give him back to me after 45 minutes, better, right? That's the general energy, right? Yeah. Yes. And Dr. Leibowitz very wisely noticed that the parents who do so, who are not involved in treatment, are not seeing as much positive outcomes from their child's OCD treatment. They're not complying with the homework. They're not necessarily understanding what therapeutic dose is necessary for the child's recovery, all that stuff. And so at the Child Study Center, they started to bring in parents for more psychoeducation and more family therapy. And through the family therapy, it was discovered that these families are doing something that is incredibly, I would say, positive for the OCD, in that it's enabling of the OCD, but very destructive for the family system, which is known as family accommodations. So family accommodations are where an entire family is basically tiptoeing around somebody's OCD. And you kind of hinted, Kevin, around this being utilized for other family members, not just children. And that's 1000% correct. When one family member has OCD, other family members are inevitably, out of an act of love, accommodating their OCD. So that is what space is tackling. It's tackling the accommodations and the things that we do as the loved ones of people with OCD that is making it easier for them to hold on to their OCD.
Right. I love that you talked about that. It's the whole family oftentimes gets roped into the individual's symptoms and compulsive behaviors. So, OCD doesn't exist just for that one person. Oftentimes it exists, or it becomes to exist within the rest of the family unit. So bringing in everybody else into the system can help and does help to reach that individual's need.
1000%. So just to give a concrete example,
yes.
A child with OCD has misophonia, struggles with the sound of family members chewing. However, it's just sisters chewing that is particularly egregious to this child's OCD, and therefore, with the best intentions, separate brother and sister, and they eat at different times in different places.
Makes sense.
And yeah, it seems like a nice thing to do. Why wouldn't we accommodate this?
Right.
And yet, as is the way with OCD, it snowballs when it gets accommodated. It snowballs when you open up more space for the OCD to flourish. And many family systems are trying to protect their peace. And what they actually end up doing is empowering, feeding that OCD monster in their family system.
Right. And as we kind of jokingly said it makes sense, right? It seems like the easy thing to do. It seems like the thoughtful and kind thing to do, just to try to create peace in the house, just to so that every kid is eating. There's not fighting constantly, and it feels like if there's yelling, if there's struggle, if there's strife, that's evidence of problem. But so pull them apart. Everyone's eating. No one's yelling. I mean, no one's eating the same room, but it's working. But what do we do about that? Because I suppose from a traditional ERP perspective, what would we say? We'd say, well, if they have misophonia, we need to, the one child who's struggling with this needs to be exposed to that sound, tolerate the experience of hearing sibling chew, and over time they would habituate to that sound and, bing, bang, boom, better fixed, right?
Yeah.
So
yes.
what sometimes does happen though? I see you shaking your head. She's shaking her head, everybody.
I'm shaking my head because I have been that ERP therapist asking for recording of the sisters chewing and then doing it in the therapy room. But y'all, I only have 45 minutes with your child. That's not enough oftentimes to habituate to a trigger that is always in the family system. And so what I need to bring the family in and see how the work that we're doing in the therapy room can happen in the home as well. And how the parents can not force the exposures to happen, but no longer rescue the OCD from the natural exposures that would happen if the family weren't accommodating.
That's a hard thing to do. How do you then bring everybody in on this process? And I really like these tangible examples. I think this gives both individuals struggling, an idea of what therapy might look like. I think this also gives clinicians like myself. And I'll say to everybody, I'm on the wait list to be space trained. My number's coming up. I think I'll be, early December, I think is when it's going to be. And we are in October. And I signed up for this in January of last year. So it's coming. It's hard. And we can talk about that, but that's maybe not a conversation for us. But so what's the next steps in this? How does space help come and help this family system improve the situation?
Absolutely. So there's a very tangible space protocol that you will be trained in December. It's brilliant. It's a very sort of follow this step, follow that step kind of system. However, in the absence of having that roadmap, the first thing that I would do is bring sister in and acknowledge sister's trauma in the family system. So you want to actually, because I'll call them OCD family systems, they tend to circulate, they tend to orbit around the person with OCD to bring the other family member in and say, this must be really hard for you. And really figure out, emotionally speaking, if they're in a position to be part of the exposures. Because that's another big question that I don't want to be adding to this sibling's feeling of, being disgusting, because those of us with OCD, and I have OCD, I tend to really overreact and hurt people's feelings with my OCD. And by the way, when I said OCD monster earlier, I did not mean the child is the monster. Just for those of you who aren't OCD clinicians, that refers to the OCD itself, which we externalize and make a caricature about. So
this is not the child you're talking about.
No. The OCD monster is not the child.
Yes.
The OCD monster is the child's OCD, which is not your child. And speaking of which, space also helps the parents notice when they are attending to their child's anxiety, they're attending to the child's OCD monster rather than attending to their child. That's the key distinction of are you connecting with your child both of your children, if there's more than one, or are you connecting with sort of the loudest voice in the room, which is going to be the OCD monster that is controlling one of your children? That's how I talk with parents about it, and they feel a lot of times bullied by their child's OCD.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like they feel like their child's OCD has absolutely taken control. And we want the child to see their own OCD as their own bully, as well as the bully of those in their family system.
Mm-hmm. So this is a very externalizing approach in a sense, or in other words, kind of othering that thing, othering the OCD. So kind of treating it as if it's this separate entity rather than it being this thing that's within me or this obsession that I have.
Yes. And so when we do space with parents for this example, they will actually be coached on why they can't attune to the child's OCD, why they have to attune to the children. And they would be instructed to write a letter. We call it a supportive letter. Dr. Leibowitz gives many examples of this type of letter. Most of them are of the format, dear my child, supportive statement, uplifting statement, supportive statement. And then the meat of the letter, which is, I will no longer be accommodating your OCD on this and this issue. I have learned through my own therapy that making your sister leave the room when she's eating is actually making your OCD worse. I thought I was helping, and I was actually empowering the OCD and taking power away from you. So as a support parent, I am going to make this change effective immediately. And so we write this letter to our children. We don't, sometimes you can text it too, but we like the formalization of something that they can go back to and remember, no, this is a promise. This is almost a contract that we as parents make with ourselves, that we will no longer give in those distressing moments.
Right. Yeah, and folks interested can look up different videos. I think there's like a 20-minute training video or something to that effect, a teaser, exciting thing on YouTube. It talks about this letter, and I love the idea of this letter. It clarifies, I love you. So the things that I'm doing, the things that we as a family are doing, it's not because we don't like you. It's not because we're trying to punish you or being vindictive. It is because the very thing that we've been trying to do that theoretically was going to help is actually not. So now we're going to make these steps in this very clear, outlined, how should I say it? I don't know, with reasonable steps. We're not going to say, we're done doing everything today, you're on your own, we're going to just suck it up. We're going to progressively start pulling back on these accommodations in this manner, starting at this time, and progressing in this fashion. Now, that being said, I've not been through the training, as I aforementioned. Is that kind of what this letter sounds like? So I think for some it can sound like, hey kid, we're going to stop all this stuff, so it's going to suck for a while.
So it's actually not just one letter, it's many letters. Okay. Because we take away, just like you and I as OCD therapists are introducing one exposure at a time, parents are taking away one accommodation at a time.
Right.
We're not overwhelming the child's nervous system by just stopping all accommodations cold turkey.
Right.
We don't want to create a flooding event for the child. And so oftentimes when parents first learn about space, they go through like a guilt process. I certainly did myself. And oh my gosh, I'm doing everything wrong. And then they try to do a 180, which then backfires and creates, even more digging in of the OCD. And so what Dr. Leibowitz does really well is, again, that methodical scientific approach, like 1 week at a time. We're not rushing forward into a bunch of changes that we can't actually sustain. And yes.
I love that. I love that. Sorry, I feel like I cut you off with all my hand motions. For everybody who can't really see us, I do a lot of hand things, and I think it throws people off. And I think that's just, I will control it. As I mentioned, my foreign language in high school is sign language, so it really worked out well until it doesn't. So as we were talking about, so that those letters outline, here are the things that we're going to do. And I think there's, I like that you're talking about it as if here's this thing from a parent's perspective. Here's the thing that I'm not going to do any longer. It's not here's a list of all the stuff that you kid now need to do. It's I can only control me. Mom and dad and sibling, we can only control ourselves. So here are the things that we are now going to do. And it puts then it puts that individual struggling with whatever the thing is into a unique position of, to a certain degree, is it sink or swim? Is it we need to figure this out? What go ahead.
It's none of those things. What it actually is just going back to normalcy. Like, really, like, space should just be called, like, just act like your damn selves. Like, do not dance for the OCD. Just be normal. That's all space is. Because we don't even realize how far we've gotten from our own value system as family members until we sort of step back and say, oh yeah, like, I do this thing that I would never do. Like, I love meals together. How did I even get here?
Right.
That's what OCD does to families.
Right. Yeah. And I love that approach in working with individuals. It's kind of like the endless debate on OCD treatment in kind of a traditional fashion is, do we do extreme stuff and, lick toilet seats and all that stuff? And there's room for that. And there's also a discussion about, do we just do stuff that we would say is normal for us, the desired way of living? And that's exposure unto itself. Right?
Yes.
It's like if we're trying to train for a 5K, do we run a marathon so that we can prep for a 5K, or do we practice a 5K? Right? Tons of arguments. It will never end. I look forward to more arguments at every conference, but it's kind of that idea of saying, I think the sales point of saying, what did you say? Just act your own damn self. I think that would have been a great title for the approach, Thin Space. But yes, joking aside, it sounds very concrete and very understandable and very kind of almost optimistic. We're going to get back to the way that things used to be. Not we're going to do a bunch of crazy things and push you well beyond your comfort zone. We're going to get back to the way that we have as a family wanted to be.
Yes. And we're not going to become the ERP therapists as parents. No way. Because that does not work. And I will tell you, because I started this center for my own daughter who has OCD, because I could not be her therapist. So I had to train more therapists to be her therapist. So we cannot, as parents, be OCD therapists. We just do not have that role in our child's life. They do not, respond to us doing exposures in the same way. And it can damage the relationship that we have with our child if we take on this exposure therapist role. What we're asking parents is just keep your side of the street clean. Okay, as long as you're not helping the OCD, that's good enough. Okay, as long as you're not empowering the OCD. So to talk about that misophonia sister, we can't force brother to sit in the room while we can't hold him down. I would never want you to do that. He's free to get up and go. But what we can do is not ask her to leave. We can control our words. We can control our actions. We can't control the person with OCD. So that's helping parents really lean into their power and realize wow, there's a lot of things that I could do that have nothing to do with punishing or bribing or, forcing my child. It's on me.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's where you said something interesting, is that in part of that letter, it says, hey, here's this thing that I'm doing based on what I'm learning in my own therapy. This seems to imply that the parents are going to be in therapy too. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Yeah, so space has elements of parental therapy because, I'll be honest, like I try to stay true to Dr. Leibowitz's structure, but I often end up having to pad it on the side before the letter with some like parental trauma management because they're coming in with very low distress tolerance. So just like the individual with OCD, we need to get their distress tolerance to a better place before we're asking them to do something that will, make their child have a big reaction. So I'm often helping the parents like negotiate sort of their own grief about, lost time, lost connection, lost opportunities, frustration. We do have to work through the parental emotions as well so that they can be in a cleared space to actually like tackle their participation in the OCD.
There's a lot to work through. There's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and fears of failures. I can imagine going through that and how you can then put that aside so that you can step into it. And also, it kind of, as you're saying, we're about to step into something where it feels like you're torturing your kid.
Yes.
I can imagine there's a lot of weight with that. And we've, with our clients here at Cal OCD, we talk about, working with family members, doing family sessions and kind of prepping family for what they're about to encounter. So that having that just as part of the, basic procedures of the treatment sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I like that you bring in how we work with families at OCD centers because those of us who are OCD therapists, we create family-focused centers. Those of us who really know OCD in and out are not just going to be seeing the child. We know that doesn't actually work. So even before the space treatment was created, even before you, Kevin, were trained in it, you were intuiting the basic message of space, which is that OCD does not exist in a vacuum, and we can't just treat the child.
Right. And it's a pain. It's a pain to think that and that's where that beating your head against the wall when it feels like you're not getting this person's participation, you're not, and you get the idea. I was curious then about, so we've written the letter, parents have read it to their kid has read it, they understand what they're about to encounter.
Yes.
What happens when the identified patient, the child with misophonia in our example, what happens when they're not wanting to participate? Like if they're go ahead.
Well, I can tell you some of the stories I've heard about what happens to that letter, and they're not pretty, but like it'll get ripped up, stabbed, flushed down the toilet, all the things. However, it usually will get read first, and I actually have parents print out 3 or 4 copies, literally for that purpose. And it doesn't need to be addressed after that first, exchange of information. You let it settle, right? You allow the child to integrate the fact that their parents are now participating in a way in their OCD treatment. And by the time you bring space online, hopefully the child is already well into their own ERP treatment. Hopefully they've sort of established, diagnosis of OCD, all the things, given them some psychoeducation. The child knows, literally any age child, after, working with an OCD therapist, they understand that their parents should not be doing what the OCD wants. They get that. And so it's more just kind of seeing that the parents have gotten that can cause like a pretty, significant reaction.
Do you see a lot of extinction burst?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, extinction burst is where OCD gets worse before it gets better. You're going to see this behaviorally. Like there will be, well, then I'm not going to go to school tomorrow if you do that. That's sort of like threatening that line. Children with OCD, they're going to be flailing when they stop losing their accommodations. They will. And the key that I tell parents is do not take anything that comes after that letter personally. Do not see that as, it's so hard. And I've been the parent. So I know how just crummy you feel when you get an I hate you and you're making my OCD worse and you think everything is OCD. I've heard it all. On both sides of the couch. And so I understand how we kind of get gaslit into feeling like we're doing the wrong thing, even when we get systematically instructed on how to take away accommodations. So many times parents will come back in the first week after the letter, sheepishly admit that they gave the letter, but then there was a big reaction, so they didn't enforce the letter. And sometimes we have like multiple attempts at the same letter, which is okay. It's, just like OCD treatment isn't linear, space for parental accommodation reduction also isn't linear.
I think that's a really important thing to highlight. I think a lot of folks, they hear research, and it's kind of like research says ERP treatment can take place within 10 sessions, so it's session 9, right? And those are under ideal circumstances. Those are under very rigid structures. And people are, unfortunately, people, and things are going to take, the phrase I heard, and I think this it's true, is it's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back process, but we're still getting somewhere. We're still getting forward. So there's going to be a lot of this fighting. And I can imagine we've heard examples of, the declaration that we're going to pull back on some of these accommodations, and the child is determined to make the life of everybody else in the family a living hell until the family comes back to their preferred homeostasis. I mean, I will say the OCD's preferred homeostasis. And that can be, I'm not going to go to school. I'm going to yell and scream. I'm going to knock everything over. I'm going to use all of my pirate language and scream and destroy things. What is, for some parents out, or for the parents who are then experiencing, for the families who are experiencing that, what are some, does space kind of speak to that approach when the individual's then kind of flailing in that? What's to do if you can't control somebody else? It does speak to that, and it talks a lot about carefully disengaging and strategically disengaging when your child, your family member is in an amygdala reaction, right? So we just like our child learns to sort of urge surf and sit with the distress and, utilize all of these strategies to not get pulled in. Same thing with parents. They might have the urge to defend themselves and, correct that they are not the world's worst dad in that moment. And in fact, it's not your moment. So I tell parents, like, if your child is being dysregulated by their OCD, that's the OCD's moment. Let it be on stage. Fine. Move away, exit stage right, and just allow for whatever physiological process is happening to happen. Yeah. And know that your job right now is to be reclaiming your child. I love the phrasing of that. Reclaiming your child.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you speak more to that concept?
So I mentioned earlier this concept of attending to your child's anxiety, not your child. your child is probably veering off of their true personality and their value system when their OCD is allowed to flourish like this. And so when we're attending to the OCD, the anxiety, we are not claiming and connecting with our own child. We're claiming and connecting with this noise that the OCD is producing between us and our child. Right? So parents often ask me, does space treatment make your child, more distant from you, less connected? Sure, maybe short term.
Yeah.
Like the honest answer is yes, they might not want to spend as much time with you. However, if that connection is based on you accommodating, enabling the OCD, well, then that's a false connection. You're actually connecting with the OCD, the anxiety, and not with your child.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's a very subtle shift, but it's really helping to center in on the child and separating that the child is not their OCD, but it's so hard to separate those two sometimes, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And for those who aren't experiencing this, I mean, I have a 6-year-old, and she is, how do they call them? Monsters. And it's not that she is that at some times she might not have the language to express what she's needing. Her emotions are going all over the place. It's because she doesn't quite know what they are, how to organize them, how to communicate those things, right? How to deal with them and how to regulate them on her own. So she is, quote, acting like a monster, but she's not. She is dealing with it the best way we can. My job as a parent is to help scaffold that and to help treat and to know that she is figuring it out. So for then a parent struggling with a child with OCD, that is the same process going on. So it's not the child is a monster. It is we are dealing with pulling these two things apart, and we love the child and we don't cater to the OCD that's trying to control the system.
Yes. And one of the times that parents come in for space treatment that I think is very interesting and probably merit its own conversation, but is with the so-called failure to launch population, because these are the kiddos that were very connected, had a very strong family system, but one that was based on a lot of accommodation. And Dr. Leibowitz is actually researching this population and how accommodations for an adult child that is highly dependent on their parents is also needing to be tackled. And how for a period of time, parents need to prioritize their child's growth over the connection to their child.
It's an interesting shift.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Because modern parenting has so much emphasis on connection with your child, and sometimes to the detriment of growth. So, for example, if your child is capable of doing something by themselves, but they say, "Mom, will you, cut this tomato for me because I'm scared of knives," because they have intrusive thoughts. Well, yes, they feel more connected with you if they get you every time they want to cut something. However, you have actually created a dependence and you've made it more difficult for them to grow and actually differentiate from you.
At what age does this tend to, do you start to see this? Do you start to see the kind of this shift in focus?
So, I think that parenting based on connection, I see that at all stages of parenting, including parenting of adult children. So I think parenting based on, growth and a child's growth as the priority, connection is very important, but not the priority. I personally, now that I have teenagers and I made all the mistakes, I would start with toddlers. I would say, I love you and I'm here, but I believe you can face this anxious situation without me. This is not a popular belief. I get a lot of backlash when I talk about this on the internet, because I think that there's a lot of parents that really prioritize those positive, constant interactions. But when your child has an anxiety disorder, you might accidentally be constantly interacting with your child's OCD. You might be saying, I love you to your child's OCD when you have to say it 15 times in a certain way. You might not even be talking to your child at all.
Right. So as treatment progresses, and as you're writing these letters, and kind of how are you gauging with the family? What's the next step? What's the next thing that we're going to pull back on, and what's going to be incorporated into that next letter?
So just like we have a fear hierarchy for the child, we have a full list of accommodations for the parents. So we, on one of the first or second sessions, once they understand the definition of accommodation, we create a master list of like 30 or 40 behaviors that the parents are doing that is making the OCD, be able to flourish. And so we go through and tackle them systematically. At some point, parents are kind of able to break away from the directed approach with a therapist and sort of spontaneously notice and correct. It doesn't have to be that systemic, but I like to ask parents, what changes would make your family resemble a homeostasis that actually was in line with your values? What changes would get you your living room back? What changes would get you your long-term sense of appreciation and calm when you're in your family system? And for a lot of them, the family needs to prioritize, getting through the behaviors that are taking a ton of time away from the family, the behaviors that are preventing a lot of that like nourishing, healthy family connection. So that's where we target. We go straight to that place where the family really wants to stake their claim again.
I love it. Yeah. It's what are some obstacles or hiccups you've seen in that you can perhaps either offer some encouragement either to a clinician who might be hearing this, ways that they can anticipate that and kind of work through that, or to the family or even individual who's going through that?
Lots of roadblocks, lots of hiccups. I have my own webinar series on parental roadblocks to treatment of childhood anxiety disorders. I mean, I can just list off a few. Parents not being on the same page is huge. When there's any sort of splitting, when there is, there are other factors in the family system. For example, there's also neurodiversity at play. So, to use the misophonia example, if that sensitivity comes completely from a sensory processing disorder, then that's not going to actually be responsive to systematic desensitization in the way that it would if it was OCD. And so the family system might feel really frustrated and not be seeing that positive feedback loop. I often see children sort of emotionally sabotaging the effort of parents to shift their own behavior. Not intentionally, sometimes intentionally, but I think more than anything, as those of us who are experiencers of OCD know, sometimes when the OCD is really in control, it will make us stop at nothing. And there are kiddos who will say, if you stop doing this accommodation, I will kill myself. And there's a whole chapter in the training for parents on what to do in that scenario. And he's pretty brilliant about it, just addressing that head on, because that feels like the ultimate, the ultimate fear manifest for
Absolutely.
parents. And so Dr. Leibowitz, says that there's ways to move through that, but to also know that, not changing your accommodating behavior is not the solution.
Right. Not going back to as we call it, the guy, not going back into the golden cage.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It looks nice, but you're still in prison.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So I would say with parents attempting to, do space with their kiddos, look for space providers in your area. There's a directory of therapists that have been trained by Dr. Leibowitz and his team. There's a fantastic book that I believe every parent should read, whether or not their child even has OCD, because it's highly applicable to anxiety disorders as well. It's Dr. Leibowitz's book, Breaking Free of Child Anxiety and OCD. It got renamed. I assign this book to everybody. And it outlines many of the principles of space without fully encapsulating the one-on-one support that you would get with a therapist.
Okay. I'll try to link some of these. Where can people find the directory of space-trained therapists?
It's at spacetreatment.net. It's a website run by Dr. Leibowitz. His team, they vet the therapists and make sure that they've done the levels of training. But as Kevin mentioned, a lot of us spend a long time on a wait list to do this particular training. So if you feel that your therapist is highly conversant in space but doesn't exactly have that training, there is a good chance that they would be able to support that. Also, space training can be done virtually via Zoom. It's a coaching service, not a therapy, so it doesn't have to be in your state. There are many providers, myself included, that do virtual support groups that have space for parents. I love doing it in a group setting as well, because you get that synergy between parents who can see each other's child's OCD and each other's accommodations clearly, even when they can't see it in themselves.
What a validating experience and a normalizing experience.
Very much so. And also, sort of everybody will pass through the different phases together and be able to, see that they're not the only ones whose child ripped up the litter. They're not the only ones who couldn't get themselves to give it. They're not the only ones who felt like, parental disagreement sabotaged the effort. And in any situation, as is the case with OCD, there is so much universality to experience. And it feels really good to see other families, really, really uplifting each other and being accountability partners for each other at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I can see that being incredibly powerful. As a perhaps taking a step back, is there intentional? Is part of this treatment at all having intentional effort with the parents to have special one-on-one time with their kid, or to go do fun things with their kid that aren't just space training and or space treatment and pulling away accommodations, but to say I want to build this relationship with you. So is there discussion about being intentional about that? Or is that just, something every parent should be doing anyways, but is that something that is specifically noted?
I honestly don't remember if Dr. Leibowitz highlighted that, but I absolutely do with parents. And this is, my own experience being an OCD, being a person with OCD and being a parent of a child with OCD. I understand that this is hard on everyone, and that in those dark moments, you need those you need those lighthearted experiences as well.
Right.
And so like I would certainly always encourage parents, like if your child is not not asking for something out of OCD urgency, attend to your child. Be there with your child, support your child. The difference between accommodating and supporting is that supporting is attending to your child. Accommodating is attending to your child's anxiety or OCD. So not accommodating, you're going to have a lot more time to be supporting, to be attending to your child and really enjoying them.
Right. And every parent is going to mess this up. Every parent is going to is going to step in it and accidentally give you an accommodation. This happens.
Yes.
Shake it off. Keep going. There's going to be next time.
Yes.
Next time.
And unfortunately, my children follow me on social media and they call me out. And they're like, "Oh, Mom, did you see how you just accommodated right there?" And so I know what it's like to only be 80% at this. And that's fine. It's fine. It is not about having some sort of perfection in your parental approach to OCD.
Right.
Not at all.
Right. Even the experts are still having hiccups. Even the experts have slip-ups. We're people too. And we just are trying to practice all the same stuff too, as best we can.
Yeah. And I laugh. Dr. Heather Tedesco, I'm going to credit her with this line, but she says, "I do my best parenting in this office." And that is absolutely true. I do my best parenting in this office when I'm on my space soapbox. And I am not able to actually manifest all of the principles all of the time. And that's, I would never expect you to either.
Right. It's slow and steady. So, I'll ask one more question, and then I know we've got we're getting up against the end of our time today. Our bonker schedules. How do you know that the treatment is done? I think that's a question that a lot of people ask when they start therapy: is how do we know that we're done? What's the termination process look like from a space frame?
So the termination process for space is I want the parents to teach it back to me. I want to see that they have the principles well enough mastered that 2 or 3 years from now, when the OCD morphs into something new, they actually understand the underlying messages of space rather than just the literal things that we did about the problems of that time. So I actually have my discharged parents be parent coaches to other families. So as parent coaches, these parents are actually supporting someone else through this process and noticing, how they're able to verbalize these same principles, but in a different scenario. And I believe that will help throughout the lifespan to, recognize reassurance and, accommodations and be able to really sort of move with the times. That's when I'm ready to discharge.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, I know I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Where can people find more information about you and what you do?
So my Instagram is letstalk.ocd. That's where I have a lot of content, not just about parenting for OCD, but a lot on my OCD experience and being an OCD clinician. I also have a website and a business. It's called Kairos Wellness Collective. It's www.kairoswellnesscollective.com. We're based here in Colorado, but like I said, for virtual coaching, that's wherever, however is needed. And I recognize that a lot of people listening do not have OCD experts in their area. And if there is anything that I can do content-wise or, supportive of your particular experience, please let me know and I will make something, I will put something out there that speaks to you and your individual situation.
I love it. Now, I would encourage people out there who are hearing that, if you have even the tiniest question or the tiniest need, take her up on that, because and she's going like, hold on, there's only so much that I can do in a week. But my encouragement for that is, if you have this question, someone else does. And that's why I encourage people to send in questions to this podcast. If someone out there has a question about OCD anxiety treatment, someone else does in the world who needs to hear that information too. So take her up on that. Test her out on that. She's going, oh no.
It's true. It's true. And I actually have to deal with my own OCD about answering emails compulsively. So I still to this day will. I will respond. It makes me so happy to be able to pay it forward to other people that don't have a clinician, because believe it or not, in Boulder, Colorado, we're filled with therapists, and I could not find a pediatric OCD therapist for my own child. And like that is not okay. So anything I can do to support other areas, like I'm here.
Awesome. Well, check out her website. I'll try to link that as well. But thank you so much for joining us today. And I should have asked this at the very beginning. If people have questions about space, if people have questions about how to implement this, how to get their kid involved with this, where they can find stuff, if they have questions about it, would you be willing to hop on the podcast again to answer some questions?
I would love that. Q&A is my favorite way to learn too. So I would be thrilled.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com, or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.